Let me know when you all can see my screen.
We can see it. Looks good.
Great. Thank you for the confirmation. I'll put on. Okay, greetings everyone. This is Gaurav speaking from Bangalore, and welcome to our June episode of SAP BTP Garage. And in today's episode, we would be looking into a use case where how, if you are a developer or if you are a partner who is looking to develop some applications on SAP BTP, multi-tenant SaaS application, leveraging the CAP and on the Cloud Foundry Runtime, this is the session for you. And in today's session, I would be joined by our two experts who are behind this use case. I would say the mind and brains behind this use case, Ajit and Alper. This is a part of two series of missions. In first part, we would be looking how you can develop these SaaS applications on the Cloud Foundry runtime. And the next session, which would be next month, would be featuring how you can develop it on a Kima runtime. So that's where, the two part comes into play. And along with me, I'm also being joined by Cecily, who is the global host for our SAP BTP Garage, and the two experts, Ajit and Alper, joining me from the office of the CTO for SAP BTP. And also, I would like to extend my thanks to you who have, made SAP BTP Garage a huge success over the past years and months. So please keep that support coming in. Multiply the sessions and the knowledge that you have been gaining from this round. So a warm thanks from my side as well. We would be doing a follow-up session for this as well later today for Americas and Europe friendly time zones. So if your colleagues are based out of those locations, feel free to share them this a nice asset as well. Along with Garage, we also have some, in-person enablement workshops for partners. So if you want to, multiply your knowledge on topics such as integration suite, build code, and business AI, please register yourself in the locations that you see on my screen. We would be also sharing the links to these partner workshops where you can register yourself or motivate your colleagues to join in. With that, I would just like to give you a teaser for our next session in the month of July. As I mentioned, it would be on developing the SaaS application with BTP on the Kima runtime. And with that, I would hand it over to Ajit and Alper to, walk you through to this nice use case and enlighten us with the knowledge they have. Over to you guys, and thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav. I hope you can hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right. Uh, Let me start sharing my screen first. Gaurav, can you confirm that you can see my screen and it's
Yes, we can.
visible? Okay, cool. All, all right. Just give me a minute. I'm trying to just settle my screen. Okay. All right. Uh, Hi, everyone. I am Ajit, and I'm here with my colleague Alper. We both are working as cloud architect in platform architecture and adoption team, and we currently belong to Office of CTO. And today we will be talking about developing multi-tenant application with CAP, especially on Cloud Foundry environment in the next 45-50 minutes, right? So given that the audience could be from different backgrounds and with different experience on SAP BTP, so we will start with the basics. Why do we need multi-tenant? What are the benefits, and what are the challenges of multi-tenant application, etc. And then we will move on to different important topics like data isolation and how does BTP helps in developing multi-tenant applications as well, right? Towards the end, we will talk about our sample repository that we have provided by applying all these concepts. Uh, and how do you develop such an application on BTP? The sample has both Cloud Foundry and Kima, but today's focus will be on Cloud Foundry environment itself. And we will also show a short demo by talking about few of the features of that sample. Note that this is with respect to that discovery mission. You already can start step by step following that mission and do uh, deploy a multi-tenant application in your account and have a go at it, right? So let's start from the very beginning. Why do we need a multi-tenant application at all? How can SAP customers and partners benefit from multi-tenants? So what we have seen so far in our customers from our customers that they start to move their teams and departments on to SAP BTP or different hyperscaler environments for that matter as part of the digital transformation. However, they do not see the expected benefits like TCO reduction and reduced maintenance and support efforts don't kick in as expected, right? So now let's analyze one of the major reasons for that and give you some ideas how to overcome this issue, right? So what happens is when customers onboard their team, be it different departments or different legal entities in separate accounts, they tend to do it without establishing a proper development guidance, which leads to different teams developing whatever they want, however they want to satisfy their needs of the department they belong to, right? Additionally, a lot of customers are not leveraging the capabilities of SAP BTP when it comes to sharing of resources, right? For example, three different sales team has if we consider the current example, let's say customer has three different sales teams in three different regions, and each of these regional teams develop applications and deploy into different sub accounts and start using it, even though the requirements from the different sales team are quite similar, right? So which leads to basically using the resources of SAP BTP multiple times for same purpose, but not effectively, right? Three different applications use three times runtime memory, three SAP HANA Cloud instances, essentially three times of everything, right? So this leads to basically higher TCO and more support and maintenance efforts because individual admin teams have to maintain the applications and maintain the user permissions, etc. Right, in each of these sub accounts, right? So instead of that, what can be done is streamline the development process, okay, and then develop one application which can be shared, or the resources of the SAP BTP can be shared across different team. Now how do we do that? So in that case, SAP BTP multi-tenancy SaaS application using CAP can help here, right? That's the ultimate idea of this session, that to help customers reduce their TCO, or partners build multi-tenant application and sell to different their customers, right? So now before jumping in, let's understand what is multi-tenant application, okay, and what is multi-tenancy, right? Multi-tenancy is basically an architecture approach where single application, single instance of the application serves to multiple customers or being used by multiple customers, right? Typically, each of these customers in technical terms is called tenants. So if you hear in this session that tenant, I'm usually referring to an individual customer, right? Even though a single instance of application is being shared, uh, the different data that belongs to each of these customers are stored separately, right? The configurations also being isolated from each other. So which essentially means even though the application is physically integrated, in terms of logically, the customers' data and informations are completely separated, However, they do share the resources. So if you look at the diagram, in case of single tenant, you are deploying individual applications for each of the customers. If you have 3 customers, you are 3 times deploying, the entire applications in different infrastructure. However, in the case of multi-tenant, you have a single application, right, which runs on a infrastructure. However, that is being accessed by multiple customers, right? So essentially, multi-tenancy is basically a architecture pattern to serve multiple customers using one instance of the software, right? Now let's look at some of the benefits of multi-tenant application. One is basically the reduced cost, because we are sharing resources, right? The cost is reduced. Now, let me give you an example, real-time example here, real-life example, so that you can understand a little bit. So take an example of shopping mall, right? The shopping mall is a single physical infrastructure, and it provides different shops, to different vendors. Uh, and these vendors, they have their own products, brands and marketing. They sell to their own customer, etc. However, they do share the physical infrastructure of the shopping mall. For example, the utility, the security, the parking, etc. They do share the physical infrastructure. So shopping mall is a perfect example of multi-tenancy, where the shopping mall maintains the infrastructure, pays for whatever the utility, parking, everything. However, each of these vendors just subscribe to one of the shops and use for their own benefits, right? So this is one of the example of multi-tenancy. Because the resources are shared, the cost becomes reduced. Each of these vendors do not care about how the parking is managed, how the utility is managed, and how the security is provided. So which essentially reduce the cost. Now let's bring it to in our scenario. If you talk about applications on an SAP BTP, you would have taken if you deploy application for 3 different customer and 3 different software instances, you would have used 3 different SAP HANA Cloud instances. Now, if you are going for single instance, which means you are using a single HANA Cloud instance, then you are sharing the cost of that HANA Cloud, and which essentially reduces the cost, right? Now, the second benefit that you get is improved scalability. As I said, when you scale, let's say the HANA Cloud DB from 32 GB to 256, let's say, then it is still shared across multiple customers, because it's still the single instance and used by multiple customers, right? So the scaling becomes effective. Also, the same resources are being used effectively. For example, you have 2 teams. One is sitting in Europe, and another is sitting in USA using the same application, which means your resources are being used daytime by the European customer, and in the night, it is being used by US customer, which essentially makes the effective uses of all the resources for that application, right? Also, it has additional benefit of easier maintenance and simplified upgrade, because it is a single code base and infra. It's a single instance of software running. So you can easily maintain. If there is a bug, if you're fixing it, you're fixing for all the customers, right? Similarly, if you're providing or adding additional functionality or feature into the application, you're basically adding for all the customers. So which means when you upgrade your application, it is being upgraded for all customer, which simplifies the upgrade process for all of these customers. Otherwise, you would have end up upgrading individual instances uh, for all customers, right? So it has multiple benefits. However, it has its own challenges. Some of them are listed here. First is, of course, increased complexity, because now we are using single instance for all our customer. So we need to make sure that the data is isolated effectively and it is always available, and the application is scalable, right? Because it's being used by multiple customers. Also, it provides a bit of less flexibility. Here, what I mean by is that it's kind of one fits all approach. You have designed application which being used by multiple customers, which means the requirements has to be similar for all of these customers, right? Of course, you can provide different customer extensibility, or use feature toggles to kind of enable different uh, features of this application for different customers, right? In addition, when you use multi-tenant application, or when you design a multi-tenant, there could be regulatory challenges because of diverse customer requirements. For example, Europe customers may have different regulatory requirements, and US customer may have different regulatory requirements. This could lead to challenges in terms of designing your multi-tenant applications as well, right? So with the same reasons, right, because of the different data integration requirement from different customers or consumers, it could introduce certain challenges in designing the multi-tenant applications. Uh, b- um, be- it is simply because some customer might want different integration approaches. For example, some customer may not want to use cloud connector. Some might want to use pull approaches rather than push approaches, right? So this could lead to complicated designs or challenges during development of multi-tenant application. So this is a quick overview of what are the benefits and challenges that you face while considering a multi-tenant application. Now let's look at it, the basics, what do we mean by, multi-tenant application on BTP, and how do we apply the multi-tenancy concept? So when we talk about multi-tenant application on SAP BTP, we are talking about two different roles usually involved. One is the application provider, and this other one is application consumer. Application provider develops, operates the application on SAP BTP, and also pays for the resources that is required, that is being consumed as part of the application and on SAP BTP, right? And typically, so basically, whatever the resources consumed on SAP BTP is being handled by the application provider, and whatever the fees, subscription fees, or consumption fees, it's provided by the application provider. Once the application is deployed, it is ready for the consumption by the customers, who are nothing but application consumer, right? So you might have seen before, when you have used different services on SAP BTP, for example, BAS or integration suite, you might have subscribed to different applications. It's the similar approach. You can subscribe to the applications deployed by the application provider in their sub account. However, the subscription happens in the customer or consumer specific sub account, where they see the subscription details. They can subscribe similar to BAS or integration suite, and at the end, they get a dedicated URL for their business user to consume, right? So now let's bring that into our scenario, where we had three different sales team, right? The approach could be right. There is a central sales team which can act as an application provider, design the application, taking all the requirements from different regional sales teams, and then manage the application in their own central sub account. And the other sales regional teams are just subscribing to it and consuming the application, right? In this case, these different regional teams act as application consumer, right? Uh, so this setup, works as long as they belong to the same global account. This approach is very simple to implement and can be repeated for all other legal entities if required. So tomorrow there is a new sales regional team, then all they need to do is just create the subscription from a different consumer sub account, and they are good to go, right? So now let's check some of the important services that act as a cornerstone for such a multi-tenant application, right? So this figure kind of indicates the relationship between the application provider sub-account and the consumer sub-account. Note that both provider and all these consumer sub-accounts are part of the same global account managed by the application provider itself, right? So first, the application provider deploys the multi-tenant application to the provider sub-account. Okay. Upon deployment, the SaaS application of the multi-tenant application is registered with the SAP SaaS provisioning service, basically a SaaS registry, which makes the application available as subscription to consumers. It's basically telling that to that SaaS registry service or SaaS provisioning service instance that this is my multi-tenant application, and here are the information to subscribe, right? And this makes sure that in the consumer sub account you see the subscription details when you are trying to subscribe to a multi-tenant application. Now the application itself uses the tenant-aware application router and access UI service instance to authenticate business users of the application at runtime. Simply, this application router and the access UI instance work together, to determine who is the consumer, basically, which user from the which sub account is trying to access the application, and what's the tenant details, right? So the application router helps in identifying the tenant details based on the host pattern, that is a parameter for the setting up the application router, and the access UI instance makes sure that the users are authenticated and authorized from that consumer sub account, right? So this is how, in theory, very high level theory, that how a multi-tenant application works, right? So you might also have a question: does this apply similarly to the partners as well? The answer to that is yes. It's the same approach where SAP partners can act as an application provider, and they can develop their different solutions or applications on SAP BTP using the multi-tenancy concept, and sell to their customers, where each of these customers are treated like a application consumer or a tenant, so to say, right? So now that we understand how the overall multi-tenant concept looks like on SAP BTP. Now let's jump into some of the key requirements of a multi-tenant concept, and how does SAP BTP and CAP offers to help in developing such an application. So one of the key requirement for multi-tenant application is data separation, because a single software instance is being used by multiple customers, which means we need to make sure that the data is completely separated, right, for each of these customers. So there are three ways we can do it. Okay, the first one is DB instance separation, where we are using a single separate DB instance for each customer, right? Technically, this is true data separation. A completely dedicated SAP HANA instance could be used, right? However, this leads to more cost, right? And it is a straightforward approach, and the backups are easier because we're talking about the taking individual database for each customer, right? The other approach is the column discriminator, where you each table as part of that application it has, right? There is always a single column which identifies the tenant or the consumer, right? Uh, Even though this is using a single DB, which makes the cost less. However, it is of high risk, because at the application level, you need to filter on tenant ID for every crude operation. For example, when you're implementing a insert or select operation, you need to have a where clause where you're filtering based on the tenant ID, right? So if you miss out on this filter for some reason, then you are risking sharing data from different customer to some other customers, right? So this is of very high risk. Now the last option is schema separation. So a dedicated schema is being used for each customer. If we are considering SAP HANA Cloud is the database of our choice, then now we are using individual HDI container for each consumer, and this approach is recommended by SAP, right? And this is natively supported by CAP and SAP HANA Cloud. I will talk about it and how it helps a little bit in the next slide, right? How SDI container can be created for each of these customer, etc. So in terms of cost, you're still working with a single SAP HANA Cloud instance or a single database instance. So it definitely reduces the cost compared to DB instances separation. Because you're using a different schema or a SDI container for each of these customers, your data is completely separated from each other, right? And now, so besides the important database isolation, SAP BTP also provides different other benefits. For example, various services such as even mesh destination service, custom domain service, job scheduler service provide multi-tenancy support, which essentially means that they provide secure isolation of processes, or offer multi-tenancy support out of the box. And depending on your requirements, the major runtimes like Kima, CF, and Avapro can also be used for designing SaaS solutions, right? Not only just in a Cloud Foundry, you can use other environments as well. And we, SAP BTP also has certain frameworks like CAP and RAP, which come with pre-configured multi-tenancy features, and that can handle the foundational multi-tenant scenarios by default, right? Also, we have other frameworks or libraries, SDKs, such as SAP Cloud SDK, which offers multi-tenancy support out of the box. In addition, SAP also offers different benefits for partners as well, where SAP offers a revenue share model or and helps in listing their partner solution on SAP Store as well. Now, this is in terms of SAP BTP, but I also want to talk about a bit on CAP as well to make your development efforts more streamlined. CAP, offers different out-of-the-box service integrations and multi-tenancy tools to kind of help speed up the process and manage some routine or foundational features of the multi-tenant applications out of the box. Okay, CAP provides integrations to access to a instance which helps in authentication and authorization. It also has tighter integrations to destinations service, connectivity service, etc., which effectively helps in bringing customers' data to connect to the customer's landscape as well. In addition, it has this multi-tenancy tool or empty access tool, which provides kind of different features, which helps in extensibility and uses using feature toggles to enable or disable different features for specific customers. It also helps in testing your application locally. How do you test in the multi-tenant features in a local setup, right? Out of the box. Right. So this is more of what SAP BTP and CAP offers to develop multi-tenant application. Now let's look at how it actually works a bit. How CAP is bringing everything together in a multi-tenant SaaS application. So if you talk about the single tenant, you have application router, which is your entry point. You can the customers are accessing the application, and it reaches to the application router, which uses access UA service instance to authenticate and authorize, and then forwards the request to your backend CAP application, which brings the data from your dedicated HT container or the HANA Cloud database, fetches application from customers, let's say SAP S/4HANA system via destination service, and source it on the user interface. It's pretty straightforward, right? Because you have a single instance of software running for each individual customer. Now, in case of multi-tenant, what happens is consumers start subscribing to the application, which sends the request to SaaS registry, which in turn forwards your SaaS backend or your CAP-based SaaS backend application. And this CAP backend uses the service manager service to create this dedicated HTA container for the consumer that is trying to subscribe. Once this container, all this setup is done, it provides a dedicated URL for that, which is very specific to that customer, right? Once the customer gets the subscribes to the application and gets the URL, and they try to access the application, again, it goes to the application router. This time, application router again uses the access UA to kind of authenticate and authorizes. However, it checks with the consumer sub account whether the user is available and what are the authorizations to access the applications, right? And this is where the multi-tenancy concept is built into the CAP, where it uses the access instance to go to the consumer sub account and verify all this, right? And then forwards the request to backend, which identifies who is the tenant and which is the correct HDA container and brings the data from there. Also, same way, it uses the multi-tenancy supported destination service to fetch the data from for that customer, their own dedicated whatever connected SAP systems, right? It brings the data from that customer's SAP or non-SAP system and presence to the user. So this is how essentially it works. The flow, the data flow that happens in a multi-tenant applications, right? Now this gives you a glimpse how this architecture works. Now let's look at it in a more architectural way on SAP BTP. What are the components required, etc. All right. So you have your SaaS business application or SaaS backend, which is your multi-tenant application. This is again connected to your SAP, customer specific. This is deployed on SAP BTP Cloud Foundry, and it is connected to the SAP HANA Cloud instance via Service Manager, which helps in creating these SDI containers dedicatedly for each consumer or each tenant. Also, you can connect to different, other services from SAP BTP, for example, credential store, alert notification, application autoscaler, or the application logging, which helps in achieving different functionality, right? Also, you can also connect to custom domain service where you can provide customer branded URLs to each of these consumers, so that they do not see a technical URL which identifies the consumer. Instead of they are getting their own branded their customer specific URL they can get, right, according to their own brands. Also, note that the communication to your SaaS application could happen in different ways. One is your SaaS application is pulling data from consumer systems, customer system. Of course, this is where the destination service is connected, and from the consumer sub account, you are pulling the details from their systems. But it is also possible to, sometimes you want to provide as API-like feature to consumers, where each of these customers can create a service instance, which means they get a key, credential, etc., and then just push data to the your to your SaaS applications. In such case, again, you can use CAP to build such an API service, where you have a broker which provides this service kind of a functionality, where each of these consumer can create a instance, service instance, and get the necessary credentials to connect to it. It is also possible to provide different plans for your API. For example, you want to provide, let's say, different rate limiting features for different plans. Maybe in one plan you have 10 API calls per second. Maybe you have a premium plan where you are providing 100 API calls, etc. Right? You effectively you want to bring in some API policies into the picture. In that case, you could use API management capability of our SAP integration suite. You can use that as well. Also, so far I've been telling that the user is managed or the authorization is managed in the consumer sub account. But note that some of your consumers or customers user may not be SAP users. So in those cases, you might want to have a separate user base maintained out of the SAP systems, where you could have a separate IDP, etc. Right? In that case, you could use our cloud identity services, where you are completely separating or moving your user setup as well, right? So that is also possible. And in this repository that we have provided, implementing this architecture, right? We have provided a sustainable SaaS sample scenario, right? So let me quickly jump into the repo just to give you a quick glimpse about it. It's the same if you follow the Discovery Center mission already. It refers to the same repo, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of this repo. I hope you are able to see this one. So this has both Cloud Foundry and Kima implementation using that architecture that I just explained, right? In today's session, we are focusing on just Cloud Foundry, but in the next one, I will focus on Kima as well. Right? So you can start using this repository. It has 3 different versions of it: the basic, the advanced, and then expert level, covering different aspects of multi-tenant application. Simple. If you are following the basic one, it's just a simple demo of a multi-tenant application. When you go for advanced level, you are using different other features and other capabilities, different other services, etc. For example, how do you manage the consumer extensibility? How do you extend your application? How do you send an email using Microsoft Graph? Or how do you use different cloud identity services or SAP IS tenant for separating out the user base? Or how do you manage tenant and a database container? So all these details are mentioned based on this different levels. You can start exploring all that. Yeah. So now I will just jump into the demo part. So I'm showing a demo of this same sample application that is part of the mission and part of that repo. However, I'm not covering all the features or aspects of it. I will just cover few of them, which I just explained in the while talking about architecture, what is possible, what is not possible, etc. So out of that, I will cover just few of the features, right? So as I said, each of these customer get a dedicated URL, and they access to it, authenticate themselves, and once they log in, they will see the applications that belongs to this entire SaaS application. In our demo, we have 2 different, or the sample that we have provided has 2 different roles. One is admin role and the one is the business user role. So what I'm trying to indicate here is that it is possible to have different set of applications and for different set of roles, right? Now to provide a true SaaS-like experience, right, where the users are managed within the application itself, right? Because so far in the architecture, I've been talking about, users are existing in the consumer sub account, the authorizations are maintained there. What if, you want to provide as a customer or as a partner to your customers as a true SaaS-like experience where the users are maintained within the application itself. They do not see or use the consumer sub account. They just use this application and maintain the necessary users and roles. And again, our repository talks about that as well, which provides this in-app user maintenance, okay, where you could create a user in a typical fashion. They will get an email where they can set up their password, and as admin, you assign some roles to it, and they, based on the roles assigned, they start seeing the application. Right now, also it is possible that your application works in along with some other consumer system. For example, SAP S/4HANA or SAP CX system or any other SAP SuccessFactors, etc. It works along with it. Is an extension application. It works along with those applications. So you can also pull data from those systems again using the destination service, right? So this is here we're showing one of the capability. Okay, pulling some data from consumer specific SAP or non-SAP systems, right? However, this is also possible to push data into the your SaaS application, and this is where again the entire concept of the having a SaaS broker for your API, where you provide a service-like experience to the consumers, where they create a instance of this API or service instance, and they get access to it. So this is what it represents. If you follow on the repository, you, towards the end, you will create a service instance, and you will get a key which provides you all the client ID, client secret, URLs, etc. to send or to connect to your SaaS application from a consumer point of view, right? This repo has a example to push some data from your, let's say, SAP S/4HANA private cloud edition, where you have a program which pushes some data by using those credentials that that was created, right? This repo has a example of that as well. How do you connect and how do you push some data, right? Now the next part to it is when we are sending data, you want to, as a provider, as an application provider, you want to have some policies defined. For example, rate limiting the request that is coming as part of these APIs, or how much data they can send it in terms of size of the request. In one request, only let's say maybe 100 records, or 2 MB of data that only they can send in one request. Such application level policies or the API level policies that you want to apply. And this is where again you can use API management and apply all these policies. So in the demo, it is showing that it is spike arrest because the allowed rate is 1 per second. Okay, it reaches beyond that, so it is throwing an error. So, and this is implemented using the API management capability, where you are basically forwarding all the API requests to the first API management to verify with the policies that you have defined. It can check whether okay. How many requests per second has been there, or what is the quota, what is the size of the request, etc. All right, based on the plan they have created the service instance. Right, in previous step you created a service instance using some plan, right? So you could do that check based on plan, what is the API limit, etc., and apply these policies. So this is again described in detail how to achieve such a functionality as part of that mission and repo. Right. So this is all about multi-tenant applications. In addition to that, I just wanted to give you a quick intro to the Architecture Center. This is recently announced that a GitHub-based Architecture Center. So what used to typically happen is that all of your architectures are in PPT or some Word document or some email, etc. So which gets outdated in 6 months or so, and it is not maintained properly. So SAP has announced a GitHub-based architecture center where the community can contribute. When I say community, anybody can, be it from customer, partners, within SAP or outside SAP, right, can contribute. If you see something is wrong or some architecture needs to be updated, you can just send a pull request and it gets updated, right? So just to give you a quick glimpse, let me again pull up the my browser and let me show you the how. Just let me show you just how it does it look like. So this is the architecture center. You can explore different architectures. Also, you have different viewpoints. You can filter based on the area, and we also have a dedicated section on multi-tenant SaaS application. It not only describes about the architecture that we just discussed uh, uh, in detail, it also talks about some of the functional aspects of it. For example, cost of ownership. How should you calculate the cost, and what could be the probable cost of your multi-tenant application, and how do you reduce the cost, etc. Also, it talks about this different strategies for user management, and how do you use different approaches to provide different setup user based management, right? Both in-app and externally. How do you handle that, right? It talks about those approaches as well. Yeah, so that's just a quick intro to the architecture center. Okay, I mean, that's all I have for this session. You can just go to the Discovery Center, use the if you're beginner to the topic, just follow the steps that is mentioned in the mission, and you can start deploying a simple application onto SAP BTP trial account, and see how it looks like, and how to develop such an application. Yeah, so that's all I have for today. Over to you, Gaurav.
Thank you so much, Ajit, for that, wonderful session, a detailed session, I would say. And also thanks, Alper, for, answering all the questions behind the scenes. I already see that a lot of communications happening. So yeah, again, the round is now open for the participants to either post your questions in the chat, or you can also, unmute yourself and ask the questions. So great. If not, then let's wait for one another additional minute, and we would be uploading the recording on our YouTube Garage playlist. So please feel free to check that. Also, register yourself for the upcoming sessions. So the next session, as I mentioned, would be on the Schema runtime. So please feel free to register yourself. I see Imran has his hand raised. Imran, please post your question or unmute yourself.
Gaurav, very good afternoon, good morning. My name's Imran, I'm from JLR. Just a very quick question from my good self. Thank you for the session once again. I thought that was certainly quite insightful. How is it decided what topics you're going to cover in future sessions, etc., etc.? Sorry, this is my first time I'm joining this, you see, hence why I'm asking the question. Yeah, just curious how the decision actually is made as to what gets covered in future-based sessions.
So thanks for that question. Let me take that, and probably others can chime in. So first is the community interest, Imran. So the partners sometimes also request that this is the topic they would like to be enabled on. That's the first approach. The second is also experts driven. So just like, Alper and Ajit created this use case, they thought that, it would be really value add to let the ecosystem know about this use case, the GitHub repos that they have created. And then third is also, based on our experience and our feedback capturing from the audience. So primarily these three channels feed in to the, sessions that we plan for the cadence. So yeah, let us know if you are specifically looking onto some topic, and we'll see if we can, bring the experts from that, story. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Gaurav. Appreciate that very, very
Yep.
much.
Yep. Thank you so much. Okay. If there are no further questions, let me quickly check on the chat if there are any open questions or not. See any open questions? Great. As I said, stay tuned to check the recording and also for the next session later today if you're in the Europe and America's friendly time zone. Talk to you in the next episode. Until then, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.